Hi, how's it going? It's Michael Redmond here. Now, you may well know me as a stand-up comedian, which I actually was for over 30 years. Or you might know me better as Father Stone from the Channel 4 sitcom Father Ted. And if that happens to be the case and you're still wondering how I am after all these years, well, I'm still fine. So, what am I doing here? Well, I've kind of retired from stand-up, but I keep coming up with, the odd idea for a joke or a comedy monologue or a comedy routine and that kind of thing because to be honest with you, I quickly realised that taking up gardening in retirement wasn't going to satisfy me enough. It wasn't going to do it for me. Jesus, gardening. And anyway, I don't have a garden, which is probably why I was often found standing in other people's gardens over the years. So what's this all about? Well, this is my comedy podcast, which I've called "What Are You Doing in My Garden?" I suppose the best way to describe it is it's a short weekly podcast in which I'll be, throwing in a joke or two or talking about a range of things from, say, drink driving in Ireland in the 1970s, my chance encounter with Joanna Lumley, pole vaulting geriatrics, and lots of other things. But no poetry. Absolutely no bloody poetry. So if you have anything to say or add to what I've been musing on the podcast, it'd be great to hear from you. Or in fact, also if you have any questions about Father Ted, I'd be happy to answer them as well. The email address for the podcast is whatdoyoudoinmygarden@gmail.com. Okay, welcome back to episode 6, which is called Pole Vaulting Geriatrics and a Huge Prank on Piers Morgan. I really like having funny titles in my episodes. I hope you do too, but hopefully the episodes are as funny as the titles, but I love putting a funny title in, so I think it sort of helps. So, here we go. Welcome to listeners old and new, and in particular, a big welcome to a new listener from a place called Baden-Württemberg in Germany. I'm sure there aren't many podcasters who can claim they've broken Baden-Württemberg. So maybe something, possibly to my grandchildren. Mind you, I don't have any grandchildren, so I'll tell somebody else's grandchildren. What the hell, confuse them. Now, before I go any further, a little apology because we normally put out a podcast every Sunday, but I wasn't able to do one last Sunday because my train was delayed. I was staying up in a place called Crianlarich in my son's house in Crianlarich, a beautiful place north of Scotland, up in the Highlands. Beautiful scenery, lots of rock pools and all that kind of thing. And actually, believe it or not, I jumped into a rock pool from rocks. I was terrified. I thought I was going to have a heart attack, but apparently I didn't. But it's a beautiful place, Crianlarich. It's up by the West Highland Way, so if you're ever up in Scotland, go up and have a look. It's fantastic. But the problem about Crianlarich was I was due to get the train at 1:30 from Crianlarich to Glasgow, which should normally take about an hour and a half. But due to the train firstly arriving an hour late, then breaking down a few minutes later, starting again, stopping again. Anyway, this went on and on and on. And a journey which should have taken an hour and a half took a full 7 hours. And I didn't get back to Glasgow till about 8 o'clock, far too late to do the podcast, and my brain was a bit frazzled at that stage anyway. But not to worry, we're here now. Now, if you happen to listen to last week's episode, you will know that in the late 80s, I did a pretty awful audition for the part of Joey the Lips in the film The Commitments, which was pretty huge at the time. I think it's shown in cinemas all over Ireland and Britain, maybe even America, I don't know. But it was really, really, really popular. And I've since heard a nice story about the actor Johnny Murphy, who played the part of, he actually got the audition for the part of Joey the Lips, which I didn't. I'm not bitter, by the way. He did a great job, probably a lot better than I would have done. But this was probably about 6 months after the film had been released. And the actor, Johnny Murphy, was walking along O'Connell Street one day, which is a huge street in Dublin. And so at the time, it used to house a few banks. I don't know whether it still does because I don't live in Dublin anymore. But he was walking along O'Connell Street one day, and as he was walking by one of the banks, these 3 robbers burst out of the bank with their booty on their way to their getaway car. But the thing is, one of them actually recognised Johnny Murphy from the film. And he actually stopped in his tracks. I think he was maybe a bit starstruck probably, but he just looked at Johnny Murphy and went, "Fuck me, it's Joey the Lips," and then scuppered into his getaway car, which I think is a lovely story. Now, there's an island called Okinawa off the coast of Japan. Some of you may be aware of it, some of you may not, but it's noted for the fact that its natives live a very long life, longer than anywhere else in the world, apparently. And it's all down to a few things, that their diet, which is made up entirely of fish, and the fact that they have quite a relaxed lifestyle. They practice Tai Chi in the park, and hardly any of them drink or smoke, that kind of thing. Now, I don't think I would have made a good Okinawan. I don't think I could have handled that sort of lifestyle. I could handle, maybe not drinking alcohol, not smoking, practicing Tai Chi in the park, but I really couldn't eat fucking fish every day. I'm nothing against fish. I do eat it now and again, but I have a kind of a mental block about fish, and it comes back to my upbringing in Ireland in the 70s and 80s, because back then in Ireland, Catholics were not allowed to eat meat on Fridays. I don't know where this rule came in. It was an edict from the Catholic Church, probably from some pissed pontiff back in the 16th century, I don't know, who maybe said, oh, you cannot eat meat anymore, you must eat fish on Friday. It probably pissed out of his brain, I don't know. But everybody in Ireland ate fish on Fridays because they couldn't eat meat. And the entire country fucking stank of fish. I mean, the smell was so strong that seagulls would fly in from abroad just for the day, you know, people coming home with smoked haddock in their coat pockets for dinner and streets strewn with half-dead lobsters trying to make a break for it. But, so I wouldn't have made a good Okinawan, basically. But the thing about this is that it's not just Okinawans are living longer than other people, but it's not just that. Everybody around the world is living longer due to sort of advances in medical science and improved diet and all that kind of thing. Now, it's fine that people are living longer, but I have a slight problem, because as they get older and physically stronger, is that going to be sort of matched with a mental agility, you know? Because I have this fear from the future we're going to end up with these sort of maybe hordes and hordes of super fit but yet senile geriatrics, you know, escaping from old people's homes by pole vaulting over the walls and running into the local park and chasing the ducks in the pond instead of feeding them. But I was thinking, if we can have pole vaulting geriatrics, why can't we have geriatric Olympics? I think that would be brilliant. I think I can imagine Sky Sports, well, metaphorically speaking anyway, would sell their granny to cover an event like that. I think it'd be brilliant watching all the geriatrics going around the tracks doing their thing. Well, you could have some stumbling blocks, I suppose. Maybe you might have a misfiring geriatric javelin thrower taking out the leader, the 98-year-old Kenyan who has been leading the 1500 metres up into the final bend. Pretty cruel, but bloody good television. But I was reading somewhere recently that the oldest man in the world is not actually an Okinawan. It's an Englishman called John Alfred Tennyson, who's 111 years old. Now, that sounds fine, but I don't think I want to live to that age. You know, imagine being 102, 103 years old and suddenly thinking to yourself, for fuck's sake, things are dragging on a bit now, you know? And to make matters worse, my 79-year-old son is still living at home. I've been trying to get him to clean his room for years, but now he says he can't do it because of arthritis, the little bastard. But on the subject of age, I say I don't want to live to 102, 103, but just in case I do, I've made my last will and testament recently. Now, I've left everything in my will to my 3 kids, except my old 1970s lime green sofa bed with cigarette burns in it, because my kids said if I leave that in the will to them, they're just going to throw it out. And I don't want it thrown out because it's got some sentimental value. So just for a laugh, just for the hell of it, and I have genuinely did this. I've left my 1970s sofa bed in my will to Piers Morgan. Now, I don't know him, it's completely random, but in 10, maybe 20 years' time, Piers Morgan is going to inherit my 1970s sofa bed and he won't know what the fuck is going on. But since I've been thinking about that, I think maybe if everybody could leave something trivial in their will to Piers Morgan, that would be bloody brilliant, wouldn't it? Because over the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, he'd be receiving old cracked teapots, shitty sofas like mine, and I don't know, maybe old Monopoly sets with half the hotel pieces missing. It'd be brilliant. It'd be the prank of the century. Let's go for it. But I have one slight regret about leaving my lime green 1970 sofa bed in my will to Piers Morgan, and that is that unfortunately I won't be alive to see Piers Morgan's expression as my sofa arrives on his doorstep. As I mentioned before, I was a stand-up for over 35 years, and over those years I had some very memorable gigs, probably thousands of gigs altogether, some memorable, some not so memorable, but one gig is always embedded in my mind. I think it's the same with all stand-up comedians. Every one of us remember our first gig. I'll tell you a little bit about my first gig because it's embedded in my memory. I arrived in London to do comedy in the stand-up circuit, and I arrived one sort of cold, wet, rainy Monday morning in January at 7 a.m. at Euston Station. And I was told maybe to head to Finsbury Park because there was a lot of flats to rent in that area. And it was quite handy because Finsbury Park was only about 2 or 3 tube stops from Euston Station, Euston Underground. So I headed from the main station in Euston towards the Underground leading into the tube station. I couldn't fucking believe it because I've been living in Dublin all my life, and I've been on an escalator here and there, maybe just little small escalators in shopping centres, but I couldn't believe the size of this fucking escalator. It seemed to sort of burrow deep into the underground, never to return. And I was actually terrified stepping on it that I wouldn't come back again. But anyway, I controlled my nerves and got on the escalator and eventually arrived in Finsbury Park. I spent most of the morning lugging my suitcase around. Actually, it was one of those old-fashioned suitcases, you know. Back in those days, suitcases didn't have wheels. Young people may have realised that. In those days, you'd no wheels on your suitcase. It wasn't like today, you lucky bastards, you got wheels on your suitcases. So I was lugging my suitcase around Finsbury Park, around estate agents in Finsbury Park. I think it was probably by the mid-afternoon. I finally was offered a bedsit in a place called Turnpike Lane, which is in North London, not far from Finsbury Park. It was a pretty horrible little bedsit. Hardly any furniture. I think there was an old single rickety bed and a table and chairs, and in fact not chairs, just one chair. But I did buy a sofa for the flat. That was my 1970s lime green shitty sofa with cigarette burns in it. And in fairness, I think the cigarette burns weren't in it when I bought it. It cost me £5 or something. I think the cigarette burns are probably down to me. But I was staying in this shitty little bedsit, and my first gig was about 2 weeks after I arrived in London, and I was in this vegetarian restaurant on the Archway Road. And I vividly remember walking towards the gig, and it's a strange thing doing your first gig, a really weird mixture of emotions. I can only describe it as a mixture of blind terror and wild excitement. So I arrived at this vegetarian restaurant on the Archway Road. The gig was run by a guy called Kim Wells, a lovely man. If you're still listening, Kim, hello, and I hope you're doing well. So I arrived at this vegetarian restaurant. Now, vegetarianism, lost on my words there. Vegetarianism was sort of a very small scale in Ireland then. In fact, I'm not even sure if there was a vegetarian restaurant in Ireland at the time. So I had this sort of naive preconception of what vegetarians would be like, and I was expecting all the punters in the restaurant, all the men to be wearing sandals and shorts and sporting a big, huge beard and that kind of thing, and all the women wearing kimonos. But it wasn't like that at all. In fact, it was the complete opposite. Hey, thank you. Anyway, I was standing in the wings, waiting to go on. I think it was about halfway through the show, waiting to go on stage. Well, I say stage. It wasn't really a stage. It was just sort of a space in front of the tables that they'd made. And I remember my legs I wasn't sure if my legs were going to carry me to do the gig. I just felt really rubbery and terrified. But I eventually made it on stage, and I vividly remember my first gag went really well. It was the gag I've mentioned before that, like most people from Ireland, I was born a Catholic, which actually came as a bit of a shock to my parents, who were both Jewish. And everybody laughed. I couldn't believe it. People were actually laughing at my jokes. And I can't remember any other material I did during the show, but I can recall at some point there's this woman in the audience. I think she was a bit pissed. Now she wasn't trying to be disruptive, but at one point she just blurted out, "Are you married?" And the entire audience fucking cracked up. I managed to get a quick quip in, and I said, "I'm not quite sure if I'm married. What year is it?" But the gig went really well. I couldn't believe it. People were actually laughing at me on stage. And the main thing is, the guy, Kim Wells, offered me a booking for 6 weeks later. I couldn't fucking believe it. I was actually getting paid to do comedy. I mean, it probably wasn't very much, probably only about 10 quid. But I was offered a paid gig to do comedy, and I couldn't believe my luck. I actually walked home. I was walking on air. I couldn't believe it. It was fantastic. That was my first gig. Now, I'll tell you in another episode about another gig I did, which is about 5 weeks later. And it was the complete opposite to doing a gig in the vegetarian restaurant. It was a place called the Tunnel Club, which is in southwest London, notorious Tunnel Club, I should say. It was run by a guy called Malcolm Hardy. Anyway, I'll tell you about that in another episode. So that's about it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. But before I go, I have to issue a little caveat concerning the Piers Morgan bit, because I've been told that for legal purposes, encouraging you all to leave something trivial in your will to Piers Morgan could be perceived as harassment, and I might get sued by Piers Morgan, which I really don't want to be. So I'll have to actually actively encourage you not to leave anything trivial in your will to Piers Morgan, so I won't be sued by Piers Morgan. Funny, bloody funny though it would have been. So that is about it. We're going to finish on my cocktail recipe of the week, and I'll be back next week with episode 7, which is called Fears, Phobias, Vikings, and Dame Helen Mirren. See you then, hopefully. All the best. Bye-bye. Okay, it's time for my cocktail recipe of the week. As you know, if you listen to other episodes, I enjoy a good cocktail, particularly with some Cointreau, which is my favourite liqueur, I have to say. But I wasn't always like that. I mean, it's only in the last sort of, I'd say, maybe 5-6 years I've started drinking cocktails. Didn't drink them when I was in Ireland, or even when I was in my comedy days in London, but it's actually all down, surprisingly enough, to my 22-year-old son who loves a good cocktail, and he sort of got me into cocktails rather than just me sort of picking it up myself. So, and also the fact that I'm now retired helps a lot, because I've plenty of time to make cocktails, and it's something I actually look forward to every evening around 6 o'clock every evening, or even maybe 8 o'clock, or maybe even 10 o'clock, who knows. But I do love a good cocktail, and I hope you do too, and I hope you've been enjoying all the recipes I've given you so far. So sit back and enjoy this cocktail recipe of the week, which is called a boozy orange coffee. It's a bit more sort of sweet than the other ones I've had before. Let me say a bit more kind of sumptuous, maybe might be the word for it. But you really love it. I've had one already. Not today. I've had one yesterday. I'm not pissed. So here we go with the recipe for boozy orange coffee. So I hope you're properly attired for the cocktail. So here we go with the ingredients, as what you call them. You want 40 milliliters of Cointreau, 150 milliliters of freshly brewed black coffee. Now, none of your instant crap. It has to be freshly brewed black coffee. You'll also need 1 teaspoon of sugar, and finally 50 milliliters of chilled and whipped double cream. Now you dump the cream into the shaker, put all the other ingredients in the shaker, and then you pour the cream over the cocktail with, over the back of a spoon, the way I do it. And it's a lovely cocktail. I've had them many times, not today because I'm not pissed. I don't get pissed before I do my podcast, but it's a brilliant cocktail. And it's a bit more, as I mentioned before, it's a bit heavier than the other ones I've done before. So pour yourself one, enjoy it, and I'll speak to you next week.